Good afternoon, everyone. So that is Roxane and me, we are Mummies and Magic, an edutainment podcast from Germany that focus on ancient Egypt and its reception in today's pop culture. We are very happy to be part of this amazing event and like to start with a big thank you to our hosts and organizers. In the next 18 minutes, we will introduce our podcast project by using the film Pharaoh from 1966 as a case study. To do this, we will briefly summarize the plot and background of the film and trace its roots back to a Polish novel written in 1895. We follow the Pharaoh through the ages, going back to the end of the New Kingdom of ancient Egypt. And we take a closer look to the props and locations used in the film, and which are closely related to ancient Egyptian originals. Rushing back into the future, we will finally see an adaptation of our Pharaoh in a sci-fi world of Perry Rhodan. But before the movie starts, a short commercial break. The podcast is organized by the two of us, which are Roxane, the head of cultural education at the Egyptian Museum in Munich, and me, Nora, who spent a year as a scientific volunteer at the same museum. We both did study Egyptology and we share a great interest in the nerd culture, especially with a connection to ancient Egypt. So every fortnight we talk about different genres such as movies, books, music, PC or board games that are related to ancient Egypt. Starting from scratch 2 years ago, we produced 42 episodes so far and reaching a community around 25,000 users. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Our fan Adrian provided us with the film Pharaoh from 1966 and asked us to dedicate an episode of our podcast to the film. And so we did. Pharaoh is a Polish historical film, a so-called sandal or monumental film, certainly following the hype surrounding Cleopatra from 1963. The film was directed by Jerzy Kawalerowicz, based on the novel by Bolesław Prusz from 1895, which Nora will discuss later. The original length of the film was 180 minutes. There were different German versions, East Germany and West Germany. We watched the restored version with a length of 145 minutes. The film took part in the 1966 Cannes Film Festival, was nominated for an Academy Award in 1967 and is still one of the most successful Polish films today. In German, the film is sometimes subtitled Die dunkle Macht der Sphinx, the dark power of the Sphinx, but don't ask us why. But what it's about. The film takes place at the end of the New Kingdom, late in the 20th dynasty. The young pharaoh Ramses XIII wants to reform Egypt and opposes the state religion. A conflict and power struggle ensues with the high priest Herhor and the Amun priesthood. While the pharaoh forges secret alliances and has the military on his side, the priests counter this with intrigues and their knowledge of how to deal with the people. The love of the pharaoh for the Jewess Sarah and the Phoenician priestess Kama, who ultimately betrays him, is also thematized. There is also a solar eclipse and a regicide. The film was shot in Central Asia, in the Kizilkim Desert near Bokhara in Uzbekistan, and in Egypt. The pyramids of Giza, the temples of Karnak and Luxor can be seen, all in their current state, which seems somewhat anachronistic. Nora will show some pictures. Expert advice was provided by Kazimierz Michalowski, Egyptologist, archaeologist and deputy director of the Warsaw National Museum, and by Shadi Abdel Salam from the Cairo Film Institute, who also advised on Cleopatra. Shadi Abdel Salam filmed The Eloquent Peasant and The Night of Counting the Years, about the family of the Abdel Rasuls.
As already mentioned, the novel was written by the Polish author and journalist Bolesław Prusz in 1895. He began his career at a daily newspaper, and thus Prusch gained insights into the latest political events of his time. So Prusch wrote a lot of short stories and several novels combining contemporary events and fiction that are considered part of the genre of the historical fiction. For example, in 1888, he published a first short story set in ancient Egypt, and that is also the basis for the mentioned novel Pharaoh. This short story is called A Legend of Old Egypt, and it deals with a fictional plot about Ramses II and the political turmoil surrounding the succession to the throne. Although the action takes place in Egypt during the New Kingdom, the plot is inspired by current political events in Germany, or to be precise, in Prussia. The year 1888 was a political decisive year, as 3 rulers ascended to the imperial throne within a very short period, and due to some unexpected death. So that's why this year was called the Drei-Kaiser-Jahr, so literally the year of the 3 emperors. Further, Prusch's mindset and therefore his books are profoundly influenced by Poland's loss of its independence 100 years ago, around 1772 to 95. But long story short, Prusch chose the historical background of the end of the New Kingdom and the fall of the 20th dynasty to display political issues of his time.
Let's look at the historic background. Already at the beginning of the 20th dynasty, 1190 BC, there were conflicts with the so-called Sea Peoples and repeatedly with the Libyans. In some cases, there were disputes over the throne, which led to the decline in power of the royal house and the strengthening of the Amun priesthood in Thebes. It was during this period of political unrest that Boleslav Prusch set his work. For us today, the 20th dynasty and thus the New Kingdom ended around 1070 BC with Ramses XI. However, Ramses the 12th and 13th, who appear in the film, are by no means fictitious, but corresponded to the knowledge of Prusch's time. Prusch probably based his research on the history of Egypt from 1880 by the Polish traveler, naturalist, writer and Dr. Ignacy Zagiel. From 1826 to 1891, he traveled in Egypt in 1860 to 61. A comparable book that was available to me is the Ägyptische Geschichte by Alfred Wiedemann from 1884, where Ramses XII and the 13th are also listed as the last rulers of the 20th dynasty. Herihor then marks the beginning of the subsequent Third Intermediate period. Prusch also used works by Gaston Maspero and was familiar with the novels of Georg Ebers from 1865. Prusch also included songs, prayers, and original proverbs in the book. At that time, Ramses XII was dated according to a fragment of the Papyrus Turin. I throw in the keyword Nitocris, here in the film Nikotris, and the difficulty of dating or even establishing her existence, but that would be going too far for today. And the Bentreš stele, which is also mentioned at the beginning of the novel as a historical classification. Today, the stele is dated to the late period or the Ptolemaic time and is believed to be a pseudo-historical document. For this reason, the name cartouche of Ramses II is mixed with that of Thutmosis IV on the stele. In Prusch's time, it was thought to be that of Ramses XII. Wiedemann thinks he recognizes Ramses XIII in the documents of Panehesi, the viceroy of Kush, but according to current knowledge, he dates to the time of Ramses XI. However, the Phoenician priesthood and its influence in Egypt, the Greek Lykon, and above all the Jewess Sarah are all fictitious, but this may also be due to the time of Prusch.
So let's now take a closer look to the equipment and props used in the movie from 1966. And to avoid too much spoiler, I will pick out some thematic groups in order to just highlight some of the aspects. So these are at first the emperor and his son. Then we take a look inside the palace and some aspects concerning warfare and real places. So, the king, Ramses XII, we met him in the movie Aged in Wisdom, and he appears like a resurrected reconstruction of the mummy of Ramses II. He sits on the throne as an ancient Egyptian statue in his full ornate. The appearance seems quite familiar in comparison to artifacts found in the treasury of Tutankhamun, especially a little statue or, of course, the jewelry Ramses XII is wearing, which is here a necklace with the scarabs and the vulture. Also, the death of the ruler is clearly orientated on ancient Egyptian archetypes, such as the lying in state or the funeral procession. The successor, Ramses XIII, he is also portrayed in the style of Tutankhamun, literally from the crown to its sandals. The guards in the background, they look like fan bearers with some sort of standard or pennant with a falcon on top that are also similar to some of ancient Egyptian artifacts. There's also a distinct scene in the movies displaying the king and his wife in the reeds. Sitting on a papyrus boat, they hunt birds. Yeah, quite like as we know it from the famous painting of Neb Amun. And even the boats are very, very detailed, life-sized replicas of ancient Egyptian models, quite similar to the models found in Tutankhamun's tomb. As the story goes on, we are able to sneak into the king's palace. Following a procession of the priests, the rooms are getting darker, and more mysterious. But besides the persons and their detailed costumes, please have a closer look at the big doors. They are inspired by Tutankhamun's furniture. So, for example, a box decoration of ankhs, war scepters standing on Neb hieroglyphs, or even the famous cartouche boxes. And my personal favorite, however, is the chair used in the procession, and that displays the central base figure flanked by two terraried figurines. And the original chair was found in the tomb of Yuya and Tuya in the valleys of the kings. Concerning warfare, we met hundreds of soldiers at the beginning of the movie, and they look quite alike figures of Middle Kingdom wooden models. So the soldiers' clothing, their weapons, their shields, and even their wigs are quite identical to soldiers in these wooden models we know from the Middle Kingdom. This is also true for the king's chariot. That is inspired by the original chariot found in the tomb of Tutankhamun, and as well inspired by depictions, for example, on this wooden box, where you can see all the details, especially the feathers on the head of the horse or the blanket on its back. There are also some battle scenes, and the enemies wearing feathers in their hair, they look suspiciously like sea peoples we know from New Kingdom reliefs. As the battle is won by the Pharaoh, prisoners are taken and are tied up exactly as shown in the statue at the bottom left in the presentation. And, of course, also the hands are taken and counted as depicted in monumental reliefs at, for example, Medinet Habu. And, of course, concerning real places, some scenes are filmed in historical settings, and they have kind of character like a documentation. So you can see quite impressive film settings of the pylon of the Ramesseum, and, of course, a majestic scenery with the chariots driving along the Gizeh Plateau with the pyramids in the background. So to sum up, the movie presents a lot of equipment and props. They are not just inspired by Egyptian originals, but display a love for details that is quite impressive.
A quite unexpected and surprising overlap with pop culture resulted from 3 paperbacks, so-called planetary novels, from the German science fiction series Perry Rhodan, centered around the Archonid Atlan, the lonely one of time. Atlan traveled to ancient Egypt at least 3 times, and the covers of the books show 2 priests in mask with the corpse of Ramses XII. The second novel does not show the Archonid on its cover, but Ramses XIII and the priestess Kama. And the third one, again, the 2 masked priests, slightly modified, but with the bark of Nikotres in the background. The first novel, Pillars of Eternity, was published in 1969, and not only the cover artist Johnny Brooke, 1921 till 1995, was inspired by the film, but also the author Hans Kneifel, 1936 to 2012. The novel is set at the beginning of ancient Egyptian history during the unification of the empire under Menes Narmer. The novel features Anubis priests and a mysterious figure in a falcon mask, and the finale in which Atlan confronts alien invaders in an underground labyrinth beneath a temple is also very reminiscent of the labyrinth scene from the film Pharaoh. Much more could be said about the book and the image of Egypt that it paints, a classic one that has nothing to do with the early dynastic period, with mighty stone temples and people riding on horses and in chariots, but that's another story and will be published soon. Inquiries with the publishers revealed that artist Johnny Brooke often worked with collages and thus probably drew on film templates, and probably also reused his own images. So, that's for short about the film Pharaoh, the very monumental film Pharaoh. We thank you for your attention and will be looking forward to your questions.